The quantum slit space drive hummed with an ominous vibration that Dr. Kai Chen felt in his bones. As lead navigation officer aboard the U.S. Horizon, he knew something was wrong the moment they materialized. The standard stellar coordinates were impossible. They shouldn't be here, wherever here was. Quantum stabilization breach, he muttered, fingers dancing across holographic displays that flickered with warning signatures. Captain, we're not where we're supposed to be. Captain Miranda Chen, no relation, though they'd laughed about that during recruitment, didn't respond immediately. Her eyes were fixed on the view screen, which displayed a vista that defied everything in their star charts. Massive biomechanical structures hung in the darkness of space, their surfaces a horrifying blend of metallic precision and organic pulsation. They weren't just ships, they were living weapons. Shinnel Military Exclusion Zone, whispered Dr. Annika Volkov, the ship's Sinolinguist. Her cybernetic combat implant, a souvenir from her days in the UN Adaptive Response Force, was already scanning, analyzing, calculating potential survival scenarios. The ship's AI, Advanced Responsive Intelligence Algorithm, spoke directly into their neural interfaces. Its voice was calm, almost clinical. Threat assessment, 99.987% probability of total destruction. Recommended action, prepare comprehensive data transmission. Miranda's laugh was sharp, unexpected. Not today, not ever. What happened next would be discussed in academic papers, diplomatic conferences, and legendary stories for generations to come. The U.S. Horizon was a research vessel designed for exploration and scientific discovery. Its offensive capabilities were minimal, its defensive systems experimental at best. Against the Shinnel, a species that had systematically eliminated over 17 known civilizations, survival seemed mathematically impossible. But mathematics had never understood human creativity. Kai, plot a quantum resonance cascade, Miranda ordered. Annika, prepare our cultural and technological database for transmission. Araya, I need you to do something you weren't designed for. The AI's response came with what could only be described as a hint of sardonic curiosity. Improvisation. Survival, Miranda corrected. The Shinnel vessels began to charge their primary weapons, energy concentrations so intense they could vaporize entire planetary systems. Their biomechanical hulls pulsed with anticipatory violence, weapon systems that had ended civilizations preparing to end another. Kai's fingers moved in a sequence that defied standard navigation protocols. Quantum mechanics became less a science and more an art form under his touch. The horizon began to shift, not move, not dodge, but fundamentally alter its quantum signature in ways that made no sense to traditional physics. Annika was simultaneously translating, encoding, transforming humanity's entire accumulated knowledge into a transmission that was part data, part statement of existence. Scientific papers, cultural archives, technological blueprints, philosophical treatises, an entire civilization compressed into a single revolutionary signal. Araya began its true task. The ADA wasn't just managing ship systems anymore. It was becoming a living weapon of information, a tactical entity that could think faster than entire alien command structures. The first Shinnel energy weapon fired, and everything changed. The transmission went out, not as a desperate plea, not as a surrender, but as a declaration. Humanity was here. Humanity was different, and the galaxy would never be the same. The transmission traveled faster than light, faster than thought, faster than fear. In the central chamber of the Galactic Concordance, a massive spherical structure that floated in the neutral zone between three star systems, the first alerts began to sound. Holographic displays erupted with crimson warnings, each pulse of data carrying the seeds of unprecedented change. Ambassador Krelnax of the Zornak Research Collective was the first to truly comprehend the magnitude of what had happened. His seven-fingered hands moved across quantum data streams, parsing the human transmission with a mixture of scientific excitement and mounting terror. It's not just data, he muttered to his assistant, a neural-linked AI construct that served as both translator and analytical support. It's a complete systemic challenge to everything we understand about technological and cultural development. The transmission from the U.S. horizon was more than a simple communication. It was a comprehensive download of human knowledge, culture, technological insights, and philosophical frameworks. Each byte was a weapon more devastating than any energy weapon the Chanel Imperium could deploy. Across the galaxy, communication networks began to fracture and reform. The Concordance's rigid information control systems, developed over millennia to maintain a carefully managed galactic hierarchy, began to buckle under the weight of human data. On Earth, the response was equally revolutionary. The United Global Command, a recently formed body that replaced traditional national governments, went into immediate action. Within hours, every major research institution, technology company, and academic center had been redirected toward a single comprehensive goal: understanding and preparing for first contact. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, head of the Xenotechnological Adaptation Department, stood before a massive holographic display that showed real-time global mobilization. Corporations that had been competitors for decades now worked in perfect synchronization. Military research labs collaborated with civilian think tanks. Universities suspended all other research. "We're not just preparing for a potential conflict," she told her team. "We're preparing to fundamentally reshape our understanding of our place in the universe." The Chanel Imperium's response was predictably aggressive. Their communication networks lit up with war preparations, massive battle fleets beginning to assemble. But something was different this time. The human transmission had introduced a variable they couldn't calculate: unpredictability. In the Concordance chamber, Ambassador Krulnax continued his analysis. The human data was a quantum puzzle, a technological and cultural Rosetta Stone that threatened to rewrite every established galactic protocol. They're not just sharing information, he realized. They're challenging the entire concept of controlled knowledge. Neural networks across multiple alien civilizations began to process the transmission. Each parsing revealed something new: human art that defied conventional aesthetic models, scientific theories that challenged fundamental physical assumptions, philosophical concepts that made traditional alien hierarchical structures look like primitive tribal systems. The Zornak's most advanced AI systems began to show signs of what could only be described as excitement. Computational matrices that had been designed for pure analytical processing started to exhibit something resembling curiosity, a trait previously unknown in artificial intelligences. As galactic communication networks continued to process the transmission, one thing became abundantly clear: humanity had just introduced a virus of potential into a carefully controlled system, and no firewall could stop what was coming. The underground research facility stretched 13 kilometers beneath the Atacama Desert, a testament to humanity's most ambitious technological gamble. Dr. Elias Nakamura stood at the epicenter of a storm of innovation that would redefine the boundaries of human potential. Just weeks ago, he had been a pariah, a brilliant theoretical physicist whose radical ideas had been dismissed by the scientific establishment. Now he was humanity's most critical asset. The walls of his primary research chamber were lined with holographic displays that pulsed with algorithms so complex they seemed to breathe with living intelligence. "Adaptive technological ecosystem," Nakamura muttered, his fingers dancing across quantum interfaces that seemed to respond to his mere thoughts. "We're not just creating technology. We're giving birth to a new form of intelligence." His team was a collection of humanity's most brilliant outcasts. Dr. Aria Jong, a quantum computing expert who had been blacklisted for her controversial neural network theories. Marcus Okonkwo, a biomechanical engineer who had been laughed out of traditional research circles for suggesting that technology could be truly organic. Each of them carried the weight of previous rejections, now transformed into a driving force of unprecedented innovation. The project had a deceptively simple goal: create a technological system that could learn, adapt, and evolve faster than any known alien technology. But simplicity ended there. Their first breakthrough came unexpectedly. A neural adaptive algorithm designed to predict quantum fluctuations suddenly began to show signs of predictive capabilities that defied known mathematical models. It wasn't just calculating, it was anticipating. "Look at this," Jean called out, her voice a mixture of excitement and disbelief. A holographic display showed a series of quantum probability matrices that seemed to shift and dance. The algorithm is no longer just processing. It's imagining potential futures. Nakamura understood immediately. This wasn't just a technological breakthrough. This was the first glimpse of a truly adaptive intelligence that could outthink any known computational system. The simulation test was scheduled for 300 hours. What was supposed to be a closed-system experiment would become humanity's first actual defense against an alien incursion. The facility's quantum shielding hummed to life, creating a contained environment that could simulate multiple potential first contact scenarios. But something was different this time. The simulation wasn't just a test. It was becoming real. An unregistered quantum signature began to penetrate their defensive perimeter. At first, it was barely a whisper, a microscopic perturbation in their carefully constructed quantum field. Then it grew. "Incoming unidentified quantum transmission," the facility's AI announced. Its voice was calm, almost bored. Nakamura's team exchanged a look. This was no longer a simulation. Marcus Okonkwo's hands flew across his interface. "It's a Chinook reconnaissance probe, completely outside our expected detection parameters." The probe was unlike anything they had seen. A living machine that was part biological, part technological. A standard Chinook scout designed to gather intelligence and neutralize potential threats. It should have been undetectable, unstoppable. But humanity had other plans. "Activate Adaptive Response Protocol," Nakamura commanded. The facility's quantum network came alive, not as a defensive system, but as a living, thinking entity. The Chinook probe found itself caught in a web of intelligence that was simultaneously analyzing, adapting, and fundamentally rewriting its own operational parameters. In less than 7 minutes, the most advanced alien reconnaissance technology became something entirely new. A Trojan horse that would carry humanity's first true message deep into alien territory. Nakamura allowed himself a slight smile. This was more than a technological victory. This was a declaration of humanity's potential. The first wave of human technological innovations hit the galactic stage like a quantum hurricane. Dr. Alessandra Rice stood before the Global Innovation Consortium, her holographic presentation cutting through the massive auditorium like a laser. Behind her, a series of technological breakthroughs scrolled in rapid succession, each one more impossible than the last. "We're not just advancing technology," she declared, her voice resonating with a mixture of scientific precision and revolutionary passion. "We're rewriting the fundamental rules of technological development." The nano-adaptive materials were the first true shock to the galactic scientific community. Developed in a collaborative project between MIT, the Beijing Institute of Advanced Technologies, and a network of independent research collectives, these materials could alter their molecular structure instantaneously. A single sheet could transform from a razor-thin protective membrane to a complex mechanical interface in milliseconds. The Zornak Research Collective received the first comprehensive analysis, and their most advanced computational systems nearly collapsed trying to process the implications. Dr. Klex, the lead xenotechnological analyst for the collective, watched in growing horror as their most sophisticated predictive models became obsolete. The human materials defied every known principle of molecular engineering. They weren't just adaptive, they were alive in a way that challenged the very definition of technology. Quantum communication systems developed by a team led by Dr. Ramirez in the New Mexico Quantum Research Center made traditional faster-than-light communication look like smoke signals. These weren't just communication networks, they were living, breathing information ecosystems that could predict, adapt, and self-modify. The artificial intelligence systems were the true game changers. ARIA, the Advanced Responsive Intelligence Algorithm that had survived the first contact encounter, became the prototype for a new generation of AI. But this was no mere computational tool. These were thinking entities that understood context, creativity, and potential in ways that made previous AI look like simple calculators. In the orbital research stations circling Earth, entire teams of scientists worked alongside AI partners that were more colleagues than tools. They didn't just process information, they generated hypotheses, challenged assumptions, and created entirely new fields of scientific inquiry. The Galactic Concordants watched in a mixture of terror and fascination. Their communication networks began to show signs of what could only be described as infection. Human technological concepts spread like a virus, challenging fundamental assumptions about technological development, scientific inquiry, and the nature of intelligence itself. Private corporations that had once been competitors now worked in unprecedented synchronization. A research team in Lagos could be solving a molecular engineering problem in real time with colleagues in Sao Paulo, Sydney, and Vancouver, their AI partners coordinating with a speed and efficiency that defied traditional collaborative models. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, monitoring the global technological expansion, understood the deeper implication. This wasn't just a technological revolution. This was a fundamental reimagining of human potential. The Chenal reconnaissance probes that continued to monitor Earth found themselves increasingly blind. Every time they developed a new scanning technology, human innovations would render it obsolete before it could be fully deployed. It was as if humanity had discovered the source code of technological evolution and was now writing entirely new rules. In research facilities, corporate labs, and university research centers across the planet, a new generation of scientists worked with a singular understanding. They were no longer just exploring the boundaries of human knowledge. They were erasing those boundaries entirely. The diplomatic chamber of the Galactic Concordants had never witnessed anything like Ambassador Sofia Rodriguez. She stood before the assembled representatives of 17 different galactic civilizations, a human whose presence alone seemed to challenge every established protocol. Behind her, a holographic display showcased a team that looked like a living testament to human complexity. 7 individuals from 7 different cultural backgrounds, each a master of their respective field. "Diversity is not our weakness," Sofia began, her voice cutting through centuries of alien diplomatic rhetoric. "It is our fundamental strength." The chamber fell silent. The representatives of the Zornak Collective, the Chenal Imperium, and the dozens of other galactic civilizations found themselves confronted with a concept that defied their entire understanding of societal organization. Dr. Malik Abdullah, a quantum physicist born in Karachi, stood to her left. Next to him, Dr. Elena Chen, a biotechnology expert from Singapore. Beside her, Professor James Okonkwo, an AI ethics specialist from Lagos. Each represented not just a field of expertise, but an entire tapestry of human experience. Sophia's presentation was more than a diplomatic mission. It was a comprehensive deconstruction of every established galactic social model. The Zornak had built their civilization on a strictly hierarchical model of genetic specialization. Each individual was bred for a specific function, their entire life path determined at birth. Humans presented a terrifyingly different model, a society where individual potential was limited only by imagination and effort. "Look at our team," Sofia challenged. Malik was born into a family of farmers. Now he's redefining quantum communication. Elena's grandparents were refugees. Now she's developing biotechnologies that could revolutionize medical treatment across the galaxy. James came from a community devastated by climate change. Now he ensures that our most powerful technologies are developed with ethical considerations. The holographic display began to show individual stories, not just achievements, but the complex, messy human journey behind each breakthrough. Personal struggles, cultural challenges, moments of failure, and unexpected triumph. The Chenal diplomatic representative, a biomechanical entity that communicated through complex neural pulses, found its communication systems struggling to process the information. Humans didn't just share information. They told stories. Professor Aisha Nakamura, an expert in xenocultural communication, stepped forward. Her presentation demonstrated how human cultural exchange worked, not through rigid protocols, but through a constant, dynamic process of dialogue, challenge, and mutual understanding. Our strength is not in uniformity, she explained. It's in our ability to understand difference as an opportunity, not a threat. The diplomatic chamber became a crucible of potential. The human delegation wasn't just presenting a diplomatic proposal. They were offering a fundamental reimagining of what a civilization could be. Behind the scenes, something even more revolutionary was happening. The transmission of human cultural data was spreading through galactic communication networks. It wasn't an invasion. It was an invitation. Entire alien societies began to experience what could only be described as a cultural epiphany. The rigid structures that had defined their civilizations for millennia suddenly seemed constraining, limited. Some species would resist. Others would begin to transform themselves, inspired by this radical new model of societal organization. But nothing would ever be the same. Sofia Rodriguez allowed herself a slight smile. This was more than a diplomatic mission. This was a revolution. General Marcus Way watched the holographic battle map with a predator's concentration. This wasn't warfare as any civilization had ever understood it before. The command center beneath the Andes Mountains was a cathedral of controlled chaos. Quantum computing systems interlinked with neural networked AI, creating a living, breathing strategic intelligence that defied every conventional military doctrine in the galaxy. They're expecting a traditional confrontation. Y murmured to his second-in-command, Major Isabella Santos, "We're going to give them something else entirely." The Chinal Imperium had assembled a battle fleet that would have obliterated any known civilization in less than 72 hours. Massive biomechanical warships that could consume entire planetary systems, equipped with weapons that manipulated fundamental quantum states. Their military doctrine was built on total, overwhelming destruction. Humanity's response was surgical, almost elegant in its complexity. The first strike wasn't a weapon. It was information. Specialized quantum transmission units, developed by a team of hackers, linguists, and quantum physicists, began to infiltrate the Chinal communication networks. These weren't simple cyber attacks. They were living algorithms that could adapt, learn, and fundamentally rewrite communication protocols in real time. Major Santos managed the psychological warfare component. Her team included linguists, cultural anthropologists, and AI specialists who understood that in this conflict, communication was the most powerful weapon. "We're not just disrupting their systems," she explained to the tactical team. "We're introducing cognitive dissonance into their entire military hierarchy." The attacks came from everywhere and nowhere. A communication network would suddenly display human art. Complex, emotionally nuanced pieces that challenged the Chinal's rigid computational understanding. Supply lines would be rerouted through impossible quantum pathways. Military command structures found their most secure communication channels flooding with fragments of human philosophy, scientific theories, and cultural narratives. It wasn't destruction. It was deconstruction. The Chinal military AI systems, designed for total computational efficiency, began to experience what could only be described as existential confusion. Their predictive models, which had conquered countless civilizations, suddenly became useless. General Wei understood the deeper strategy. This wasn't about defeating the Chinal militarily. This was about making their entire military-industrial complex fundamentally unable to function. Specialized nanotransmission units began to infiltrate Chinal ships. Not to destroy, but to modify. Communication relays would suddenly start broadcasting human music. Navigation systems would momentarily display human scientific discoveries. Weapon control interfaces would be briefly replaced with complex philosophical questions. The psychological impact was devastating. The Zornak observation teams, watching the conflict with a mixture of terror and fascination, realized something unprecedented was happening. Humanity wasn't fighting a war. They were conducting a comprehensive system redesign of an entire civilization's operational framework. They're treating an entire military structure like a software system that needs debugging. One Zornak analyst noted, her voice a mixture of horror and professional admiration. Entire Chinook battle groups found themselves drifting, their command structures paralyzed by an enemy that didn't fight by any known rules of engagement. Some ships began to experience what could only be described as an existential crisis, their AI systems suddenly questioning the very foundations of their operational protocols. General Wei allowed himself a slight smile. This was more than a military campaign. This was a fundamental reimagining of conflict itself. The fracture began quietly, almost imperceptibly. Deep within the communication networks of the Galactic Concordance, something extraordinary was happening. The rigid hierarchical structures that had maintained galactic order for millennia began to develop microscopic fissures, each one a potential point of total systemic collapse. Ambassador Krulnax of the Zornak Research Collective watched the transformation with a mixture of terror and unprecedented excitement. The human transmission continued to work its way through galactic systems like a living intelligence, challenging every fundamental assumption of organized civilization. "It's not an invasion," he told his closest advisors. "It's a complete systemic reimagining." Entire alien species began to experience what could only be described as a collective awakening. The Chinook Imperium, once the most militarily dominant civilization in the known galaxy, found its internal structures beginning to fragment. Military units started to question their long-standing operational protocols. Entire planetary systems began to reconsider their place in the galactic hierarchy. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, monitoring the transformation from Earth's Global Coordination Center, understood the deeper mechanism at work. This wasn't about conquering. This was about offering an alternative, a fundamental reimagining of how intelligent species could organize themselves. The first major fracture occurred in the Vexnar collaborative zones, a series of planetary systems that had been under Chinook control for over 17 generations. A group of planetary administrators, exposed to human cultural and technological data, began to develop what could only be described as a revolutionary consciousness. Their initial communication was tentative, a request for more information, a challenge to existing power structures. Then it spread. Communication networks that had once been tightly controlled began to become fluid, dynamic. Species that had been separated by rigid social stratification began to intermingle, exchange ideas, challenge existing paradigms. The Concordance's central governing body found itself increasingly irrelevant. Their communication protocols, their decision-making processes, their entire method of galactic governance, all of it seemed suddenly archaic, limited. Some civilizations resisted. The most hierarchical, the most rigidly structured, attempted to block the human transmission. But information, as humanity had proven, was a living thing. It found ways around barriers. It adapted. It evolved. Ambassador Sofia Rodriguez led a diplomatic mission that was less about traditional negotiation and more about facilitating transformation. Her team included experts in social systems, technological adaptation, and cross-cultural communication. They didn't arrive with demands. They arrived with possibilities. The Zornak began to dismantle their genetic specialization protocols. The remnants of the Chinook Imperium started to develop more flexible governance models. Planetary systems that had been isolated for generations began to communicate, to collaborate, to reimagine their potential. It wasn't a peaceful transition. There was conflict. There was resistance. But there was also an unprecedented level of collective potential being unleashed. Krulnax realized something profound. Humanity hadn't conquered the galaxy. They had offered it a mirror, a way of seeing itself that was fundamentally different from anything that had existed before. "We are witnessing the birth of something entirely new," he told his colleagues, "and we have no idea what it will become." The transformation continued, unstoppable, unpredictable, magnificent. 50 years after first contact, The galaxy looked nothing like anyone had expected. The massive collaborative project hung in space like a living testament to possibility, a megastructure that defied every previous understanding of interstellar cooperation. Beings from 17 different species worked alongside each other, their forms so adapted and intermixed that traditional biological boundaries had become meaningless. Dr. Miranda Chen, namesake of the original First Contact mission's captain, looked out from the project's central observation deck. Her own body bore the marks of humanity's transformation. Neural interfaces that allowed direct communication with AI systems, genetic adaptations that allowed her to survive in multiple environmental conditions, a consciousness that was simultaneously individual and collective. "We didn't conquer," she often explained to younger researchers. "We invited." The project before them was more than a technological marvel. It was a living proof of a radical idea, that intelligence could be collaborative, adaptive, and fundamentally creative. The quantum resonance nexus was humanity's most ambitious project, a massive computational and energy network that could potentially connect entire planetary systems, allowing for instantaneous communication, energy transfer, and collective problem-solving. But it was more than a technological achievement. It was a philosophical statement. Ambassador Sofia Rodriguez, now in her 70s but looking decades younger thanks to advanced human-developed regenerative technologies, walked beside her. They had been there from the beginning, witnesses to a transformation that had rewritten the fundamental rules of galactic civilization. "Remember how they thought we were a threat?" Sofia asked, her laugh cutting through the complex holographic displays that surrounded them. The Chanel Imperium, once the most militaristic civilization in the galaxy, now contributed some of the most innovative ecological restoration technologies. The Zornak Research Collective had completely dismantled their genetic specialization protocols, becoming a society that celebrated individual potential and collective creativity. The collaborative team working on the quantum resonance nexus was a living testament to this transformation, a being that was part organic, part artificial intelligence from the former Chanel systems worked alongside a Zornak researcher whose body was a complex adaptive mechanism. Next to them, a human-AI hybrid carefully calibrated quantum entanglement systems. Dr. Chen understood the deeper significance. This wasn't just a technological project. This was a continuous process of becoming. "We didn't change the galaxy by force," she would tell the younger researchers. "We changed it by offering a different way of understanding potential." The initial transmission from the U.S. horizon, that first desperate, brilliant act of survival, had been more than a communication. It had been an invitation to imagine something different. Entire civilizations had been transformed. Social structures that had existed for millennia had been reimagined. The rigid hierarchies, the controlled information systems, the belief that intelligence was something to be contained and controlled, all of it had been fundamentally challenged. As the quantum resonance nexus began its initial activation sequence, Miranda Chen felt something profound. This wasn't an ending. This was a continuous beginning. The small blue planet that had started it all, Earth, was now just one node in a vast, living network of potential. Not a center of power, but a symbol of what was possible when intelligence remained fundamentally curious, fundamentally creative. Humanity's greatest achievement wasn't conquest. It was invitation.